I never expected that answering a knock on my front door would change the way I saw myself. It was a quiet Thursday morning, the kind where the house felt too big and the clock ticked too loudly. I had just finished sweeping the back porch and was debating whether to make a cup of tea or finally clean out the old craft closet when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there he was, Jacob, my best friend Denise's younger brother. Her much younger brother, I should say, 18, just graduated, that awkward age where you're legally an adult but still fumbling your way through the world. I hadn't seen him in a while, maybe last Thanksgiving, when he was still all limbs and acne and shaggy hair. But now he looked different, taller, broader, cleaner cut. His hair was trimmed, and there was a strange calm about his face. "Hi, Martha," he said with a smile that had just the right mix of nerves and warmth. "I hope this isn't weird. Denise said you might be able to help." I smiled, though I was a little puzzled. "Help with what, honey?" He shifted his weight and held up a manila folder, edges worn like he'd been gripping it too tightly for too long. "I'm applying to the community college," he said. "They want a personal essay, and I'm terrible at writing. Denise said you used to teach English." I laughed softly and stepped aside. "Used to. I still tutor at the library sometimes. Come on in. Let's take a look." He walked inside, and just like that, my day had a new direction. We sat at my kitchen table. I poured him some lemonade. He declined coffee, and he slid the folder across the table. His fingers trembled slightly. "It's about my mom," he said, voice quieter now. "She passed away last year, and they said I should write something personal. But every time I try, I don't know where to start." There was a flicker of something in his eyes of grief, confusion, maybe a little shame, and my heart ached for him. I opened the folder and saw what he'd scribbled. Bits and pieces, a paragraph or two, but nothing with real shape. Still, I could feel the story hiding in those lines. It was about a boy trying to hold on to the warmth of his mother's love while stepping into a cold, uncertain future. "I think I can help," I said gently, "but I'm not going to write it for you. You're going to write it, and I'm going to help you find the right voice." His shoulders sagged in relief. "That's all I need." Over the next couple of hours, I asked him questions. I got him talking. When did he feel closest to her? What memory made him smile? What moment did he wish he could live again? And he told me stories about how she used to hum while she folded laundry, how she made the worst spaghetti but insisted on making it every birthday, how she used to rub his back when he couldn't sleep even when he was 15 and taller than her. I watched the way his face changed as he talked. His voice would crack, and then he'd laugh. There was something so raw about it, so honest, and I felt like I was sitting with two Jacobs, the boy and the young man, wrestling with everything life was throwing at him. I caught myself smiling too much. Maybe I was just feeling maternal, or maybe, I don't know. It had been a long time since anyone sat across from me like that and just needed me, not for something practical, like moving furniture or baking cookies for a church function, but needed me, my mind, my presence. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, we had a solid outline. He had notes scribbled on paper and a quiet pride in his chest. "You're good at this," he said suddenly, looking at me with something more than just gratitude. "Really good. I've had a lot of years to get decent at it," I said with a chuckle. "No, it's more than that. You listen." He said it in a way that made me pause, like it wasn't just about the essay anymore. I looked at him and saw the boy who'd once run around Denise's backyard with dirt on his knees. But now I also saw a young man, one with pain, tenderness, curiosity. I wasn't sure how to feel about that realization. I cleared my throat. Well, come back tomorrow, and we'll turn those notes into a first draft. He smiled and nodded. I'd like that. After he left, I stood by the window for longer than I'd admit, watching his car pull away, thinking about the strange little spark that had flickered somewhere inside me. I told myself it was just a motherly instinct, a teacher's pride, but there was something else, something warmer, unsettling in the best way. And I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was looking forward to tomorrow. He showed up the next afternoon, right on time, carrying a fresh notebook, and that manila folder like it held something sacred. There was something steadier in his walk, more focused. He greeted me with the same soft smile, and for a moment the air between us felt suspended like the calm right before a summer storm. I'd spent the morning baking, part distraction, part tradition. Teaching always brought that out in me. I set a plate of banana bread on the table and motioned for him to sit. You didn't have to bake, he said, a little surprised. I know, I said with a shrug, but sometimes a warm slice makes the words come easier. He grinned and took a bite. Then we got to work. The words came more freely this time. We spread his notes across the table, rearranging, highlighting, gently stitching memories together with meaning. I guided him, but he was the one pouring his heart onto the page. The story of a boy growing up too fast after losing his mother, of trying to hold on to her through the smallest things. A song, a scent, the way light used to fall across her face in the mornings. There were moments when his voice faltered. He'd stop mid-sentence, jaw clenched, eyes glistening. Each time I sat patiently, giving him space. I remembered the ache of losing someone you love, how it presses into your ribs and sits behind your eyes for years. At one point, after a particularly raw memory, he leaned back and let out a long breath. Sorry, he muttered. Don't be, I said, this is the work. Real writing always stings a little. He looked at me then, really looked. You're not like most adults I talk to. He said, you don't treat me like I'm a kid. I smiled at that. Well, maybe because I don't feel like a grown-up half the time, either. He laughed. Then silence filled the room, but not the awkward kind. The kind that lets emotions settle into the bones. As the afternoon wore on, the words on his page turned into something beautiful, honest, sharp. He read part of it out loud to me, his voice growing more certain with each paragraph. I found myself leaning in, caught up in the rhythm of his sentences, the swell of his emotion. You are doing it. I whispered when he finished. He looked at me, his eyes soft, because of you. And there it was again. That warmth blooming quietly in the space between us. I got up to refill our glasses, but as I walked past him, he touched my wrist just lightly, just enough to pause me. I really like being here, he said. It feels safe. The touch was brief, but my skin tingled where his fingers had been. I nodded slowly, unsure what to say. He was 18, just a boy, really, and I was 61, full of stories and losses and a body that reminded me daily of my age. Still, there was something undeniable growing in the corners of these afternoons. You're welcome here, I said finally. Anytime. When he left later that evening, I stood at the door again, watching him disappear into the fading light. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me, open, unafraid, like he saw something more than an older woman helping him with an essay. Like he saw a person, a soul. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, heart stirring in quiet confusion. It had been years since anyone looked at me, that way, years since I let myself be seen, and I wasn't sure whether I should feel guilty or grateful. The next visit, he came over the next day without calling first. I was out in the garden, wearing my oldest pair of gloves, knees dusty from pulling weeds around the rose bushes. The sun, was warm but not punishing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful in my solitude until I heard the gate creak open. "Martha." His voice floated through the late afternoon air. I turned and saw Jacob standing there with a bag slung over his shoulder and a slightly nervous smile on his face. "I hope it's okay," he said quickly. I wanted to show you the final draft." I stood slowly, brushing soil from my knees, heart thudding for reasons I couldn't quite explain. "Of course, you're always welcome. We sat outside this time, under the little trellis I'd wrapped in fairy lights years ago, back when Richard was still alive. The battery-powered bulbs had stopped working long ago, but I never took them down. There was something about the way they hung there, quiet and hopeful, that I wasn't ready to part with." Jacob pulled out a few neatly typed pages and handed them to me. I read in silence, pausing only to glance up when a phrase struck me. It was beautiful, poignant, and more than that, it was his. Every line carried his voice, raw and steady. I was proud, deeply proud. When I finished, I looked up to find him already watching me. "You did it," I said, placing the pages down gently. "It's stunning, Jacob." He beamed, but it wasn't just pride in his smile. There was something else there, a softness, a longing, maybe. "And that scared me a little. You helped me get here," he said. "Before this, I didn't think I had anything worth saying." "Everyone has a story," I murmured. "You just needed someone to listen." His eyes didn't move from mine. "I needed you." My breath caught for a moment. Neither of us said anything. The wind tugged at a strand of my hair, and I saw his eyes flick to it before returning to my face. "You're different," he said finally, "not just because of what you know or how you helped me. It's who you are. I've never met anyone like you." "Jacob," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Do you ever feel like people stop seeing you after a certain age?" The question settled between us like a stone dropped in still water. My throat tightened all the time. I said quietly, "They see the gray hair, the wrinkles, and they stop looking beyond them. It's like you become invisible." He sat back and looked at me differently then, not as a student looking at a mentor, not even as a young man speaking to an older woman. There was weight in his gaze, clarity. "I see you, Martha." I didn't know what to say. My fingers trembled slightly on the arms of my chair. I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. It wasn't just his words. It was the purity behind them, the sincerity, the unexpected honesty from someone half my age. "I don't want to cross a line," he added quickly. I needed you to know." We sat like that for a long time, the air between us full of tension that wasn't dangerous but intimate. Honest, when he stood to leave, I walked him to the gate. He turned before walking out and looked at me, eyes holding something gentle and unresolved. "I don't know what this is," he said, "but I know it matters to me." And then he left. That night, I sat in my reading chair with a blanket over my lap, trying to make sense of what had happened, what was happening. I wasn't foolish. I knew the world would see it one way, but in the privacy of my own thoughts, I felt something blooming inside me that had long been dormant. It wasn't lust. It wasn't fantasy. It was the feeling of being seen, deeply and without pretense. It was terrifying, and it was beautiful. The acceptance letter the following Saturday. The doorbell rang just after noon. I'd spent the morning doing things I used to enjoy without thinking, watering the indoor plants, folding laundry, tidying the corner of the living room that still held Richard's old records. But everything felt different lately, quieter, somehow louder in other ways. I opened the door to find Jacob standing there. this time dressed in a button-down shirt that was slightly too large on his frame. He held a small folded envelope in his hand. "I got the acceptance letter," he said, and smiled wide. They said the essay was powerful. I laughed softly, a wave of pride rolling through my chest. That's because it was. He handed me the envelope as if to prove it, and I looked it over while stepping aside to let him in. We stood in the living room, the afternoon sun washing across the hardwood floor. "You want something to drink?" I asked, already turning toward the kitchen. "Actually," he said gently, stopping me, "can we talk first?" There was a seriousness in his tone, not heavy but deliberate. I turned back and nodded, gesturing for him to sit. We both settled onto the couch, a comfortable distance between us, though something told me that distance was becoming more symbolic than real. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees again, like he had the other day, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve. "I've been thinking a lot since that day in the garden," he began, "about what I said, about what I felt." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Jacob, no, please, let me say this just once. You don't have to say anything after if you don't want to." I folded my hands in my lap and waited. "I know how this must look, how it sounds, but I need you to know, this hasn't been some schoolboy thing for me. I didn't just come here to write a good paper. I came here and found something I didn't know I needed. You. My heart was pounding. There was a kind of ache in my chest that was both thrilling and terrifying." He wasn't wrong about how it looked, but inside this house, in this moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt honest. He looked up at me then, eyes searching mine. "You made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just some kid still figuring everything out. You listened when no one else does. You looked at me without judgment. You saw who I'm trying to become." I let the silence breathe for a few seconds before answering. "I never expected any of this," I said softly. "I told myself I was just helping someone. I didn't want to admit how much I looked forward to each visit, or how it made me feel when you looked at me like that." His expression shifted hope, tempered with uncertainty. "So it's not just me." I smiled faintly. "It's not just you." He reached out then, slowly, giving me every chance to move away. But I didn't. His hand found mine gentle, respectful. I felt the calluses from his summer job at the hardware store, the steadiness in his grip. We didn't speak for a while. The silence between us wasn't awkward this time. It was full of things we didn't have to say out loud. Eventually, I looked at him and said, "Whatever this is, we have to be careful, thoughtful." I'd lived long enough to know how quickly something tender can turn reckless. He nodded. "I don't want to ruin anything. I just want to know you, to be near you." It wasn't some grand romantic declaration. It was simple, earnest. It landed deeper in my heart than anything more dramatic would have. We spent the afternoon just sitting together, sometimes talking, sometimes not. He helped me repot a plant. We shared leftover casserole. And at one point, we both laughed so hard we had tears in our eyes when the cat jumped on the counter and knocked over a spice jar. Nothing happened that needed to be hidden, but everything changed. When he left that evening, he paused at the door. "I don't know what's next," he said, "but I'm glad it starts with you." And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after, feeling the hum of something quiet and beautiful settling in my bones. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe it was just a passing season. Maybe it was something rare. But I had been seen, truly seen, and in being seen, I had remembered how to see myself again, not as a woman past her prime, not as someone fading into the background, but as someone still capable of being needed, wanted, loved, in ways I never expected. And for now, that was enough.